Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and today I want to talk in more detail about the Turbolift scene in Star Trek Discovery, which I think pretty much everyone agrees is kind of ridiculous because it's simply impossible. They show us the inside of that space in which the turbolifts are flying, and it's such an impossibly vast space that it cannot fit anywhere on the ship. But I think if you look at the details of where all the characters actually are, it becomes even more ridiculous because apparently that giant empty space is inside the saucer section, and I'm going to prove it with the dialogue from the episode, with snapshots from the episodes, and I'm going to keep track of where all the characters are apparently located on the ship in every moment, and where they are going, and where they have to pass through the ship. And then if we look at all of that, it becomes even more ridiculous. So we have to begin in the previous episode when the whole crew was captured, and for some reason they put the bridge crew in the ready room, which usually the ready room is somewhere close by to the bridge. Now maybe it's not on the same deck, but it's probably somewhere in the saucer section. And later they break out of there, and yet they don't immediately get to the bridge. They have to fight their way through corridors and through several decks, and so apparently that ready room is not close to the bridge, but it is apparently on the saucer section. And we see Tilly and the bridge crew fighting their way to get back to the bridge to retake the ship. And then those droids try to help them, and then they get taken out in seconds, and so that was pointless. And then it is mentioned in the dialogue that they are on deck 7. And then Osara calls all her people, all those regulators. She tells them to go to deck 5 and above, and then she starts to vent all the air out, which makes Tilly and her team begin to suffocate, because presumably everything under deck 5 begins to depressurize. And it's even mentioned that she's doing it slowly, deliberately, to kill them slowly, which is so stupid, because if she's in danger, her entire plan is in danger because of this team of people trying to retake the ship, then wouldn't you try to get rid of them as fast as possible? Why wouldn't you simply vent all the air out as quickly as you can? Why take your time? Why not to put some, sleeping gas in the corridors or something? So no, she decides to slowly suffocate them so that they'll still have about half an hour till an hour to make it. And also it's silly how they only found one oxygen mask for this team. They apparently are going to go through the entire ship in this last episode, and yet they couldn't find another gas mask in the entire ship. And also earlier in this season we saw that they have this new technology that can put this force field around their heads and give them oxygen. We saw that in this season, and so they couldn't find any such device on the entire ship as they were going through it. And I'm going to show you their entire path through the ship, from the saucer section to the spore cube and then to the nacelle, and they went through the entire ship, and yet they couldn't find another oxygen mask. And apparently the giant empty space cannot be anywhere below deck 5, because Tilly and her team never once suggested going into that vast space, which should have plenty of air because it's so big. And we later see Michael and Book and those regulators and that sweetheart guy, they all were in that giant empty space, and none of them had any problem breathing in all those action scenes. And so that means that the giant empty space has plenty of air and doesn't leak out. And so why didn't Tilly and her team go through there, at least to take a break, to breathe a little bit before they continue on their path to the nacelle? And so why didn't they go into that giant empty space if it's below deck 5? And so apparently that giant empty space is in the saucer section, maybe in the middle there, and at no point did Osiris say that she's restoring the life support. And we actually had a scene when she and Michael were in sickbay, and she was showing Michael a hologram of the ship and showing her that she's leaking all the air out, and it blinks red in the drive section and in the nacelle, and yet the saucer section is fine. And so we have visual confirmation that she is leaking all the air out from the drive section, not from the saucer. So that means the giant empty space in which they had no problem breathing, in which Tilly and crew couldn't get to somehow, that must be in the saucer section. And so that makes it even more laughable, even more insane, because in the drive section there also wouldn't have been enough room, but at least there is some big chunk of room in there. Maybe it was all vertical in the drive section, whatever, we can come up with excuses. And yet, according to the dialogue, according to the movement of all the characters, it cannot possibly be in the drive section at all, because they went all the way from deck 7 because they were going to the bridge. Then the air started leaking out, they realized they cannot get to the bridge, and then they decide to go all the way back to the drive section, to the spore cube for some reason. And going through the entire ship, they couldn't find more than one oxygen mask, and also they didn't think about going to the transporter room, which according to some other episodes, it's apparently in the drive section as well. I'll cover that in a separate video, but I have some proof that the transporter room is apparently in the drive section. So why didn't they go there? Shouldn't the transporter room have some of that equipment to go down to planets and all of that? So shouldn't it have some EV suits or oxygen mask or that gadget we saw earlier in this season? And so apparently all of that equipment disappeared, and they cannot find any of such equipment in the entire ship. So, why not go to some airlock and pick up some suits? So apparently they don't have any of that on the ship anymore. So for some reason they go to the Spore Cube and they discuss their next move, and then they hear Michael implying that they have to sabotage the nacelle, and then they try to get to the nacelle. So it's clear they are in the drive section, and then they hear that the regulators are being sent to deck 5, and then Tilly says that must be Michael fighting them there. And so we have confirmation that Michael and Book are in deck 5 in the saucer section. And then they get stuck there and they cannot move the turbolift, and then Michael opens the other side of the turbolift, and then we see the giant empty space. And so it's clear that it's supposed to be somewhere in the saucer section because it still has life support, and all the regulators are there, even though they were ordered not to go below deck 5. And so all of that is apparently on deck 5, and we see people falling down what appears to be like 20 decks down. So it's way deeper than the entire saucer section, and also we see how wide all of it is, and so it cannot possibly fit in any way in the saucer section. It looks like a city inside there, and so what the hell is that? So the only possible way we can explain it is by saying that reality itself is being bent. That maybe this is some sort of spatial compression technology, just like we saw in an episode of Enterprise, when actually they found a ship from the future, from around this time, from the 31st century, and it's a small pod, but when they open it, they see that it has a lot of decks inside, and they cannot understand how it's even possible. So maybe in the advanced ships of the future, it's possible to compress space, to create more space for the ship inside of the ship. But why would anyone put Turbolift there? Like, think about it. If you create such a space, why would anyone put the turbolifts in there? Because wouldn't that make the turbolift travel time longer because it now has to go through more space? And so why would you want to go through such a compressed space to get somewhere else on the ship if you can go the normal way? So what would be the point of creating such a space for the turbolifts to fly through when it will make it longer for the turbolifts to fly there? And so that's why it's so ridiculous. And apparently the data core of the ship is somewhere in there, and so why would you put it in a longer distance than you would get to it normally? And so why would you have to pass through this infinite space to get to something technical that you should have accessible? So why hide it inside that compressed space phenomenon in this pocket of the ship in which it will take you longer to get there? And so it's totally illogical if you actually think about any of this. And so apparently it's in the saucer section because Tilly and her team couldn't get there to breathe. And we know that they went all the way from the saucer to the drive section. So presumably they went through that bridge thing that goes from the saucer to the drive section. And we saw earlier in this series, we saw that there are corridors which open directly into space in that part of the ship. Because remember when they were trying to evacuate Discovery back in season 2, and they had those bridges which connected from the Discovery to the Enterprise, and we saw the doors opening, and we saw that the corridors of the ship are leading directly into space. So why didn't Osiris simply open those doors and then it will suck everyone out from that corridor, and then Tilly and her team will be dead? And so why didn't she do it? And so it's so ridiculous. So apparently Tilly and her team went through the entire ship with little oxygen, couldn't find an oxygen mask in the entire ship except for one. They made a stop in the spore room, but why didn't they go to that giant chamber with the plants, the one in which they're growing those spores? It's apparently also some big room, and so why didn't they open that big room? It would have plenty of oxygen for them, especially with all the plants there and all of that. So why didn't they stop there for 5 minutes? They have the giant room right next to where they are, and so this is getting way more ridiculous the more you think about it. And why don't they go to Book's ship in the shuttle bay? We know that he crashed there and there's fire there, but the ship was intact. It has its own life support. Why can't they find some shuttle which survived and activate its life support? So none of them do any of these things. They just give up and they lie in the corridor, except for Mrs. T, who goes alone to the nacelle to sabotage the nacelle, and she gets all the way there. So if they couldn't take a turbolift, that means they walked throughout the ship. So why didn't they split up? Why didn't some of them go to the transporter room to try their luck there? Why didn't some of them go to the shuttle to try to activate the shuttle's transporter? We do know that the shuttles in the show have their own transporters. So they all went in one group to try to get to the nacelle for some reason. Why didn't they simply go to the warp core? Why not sabotage the warp core or eject it? Wouldn't that turn off the warp drive? So why they need to target the nacelle specifically, which is a longer trip, I presume. And so many logical things across this whole episode, so nothing makes any sense. And this makes season 2 actually logical by comparison. You know, people were poking fun at the vast, giant, empty Turbolift space even back then, but now looking back, that actually might be plausible. You know, that whole section with the roller coaster turbolifts, all of that was stupid back then, but at least we can imagine that it fits somewhere in the drive section. And yet what they're showing us here, according to all the dialogue, if you keep track of all of this, it's apparently in the SAUCER section, which cannot possibly fit there unless it's a compressed space phenomenon, which they should have mentioned. I would have been fine if they mentioned it, if they said, oh, it's a new area of the ship after the refit, we installed all this extra space in case we need it, and we didn't finish constructing it yet, it's still under construction, that's why it's so empty, and we put the data core there to protect it or whatever. So they could have explained it in dialogue, like make Book surprised to see it. Like when Michael opens the door, have Book be amazed. He will say, what the hell, how does that fit in the ship? And then Michael will explain, oh, it's new spatial compression technology. We have this new deck, which is like 20 decks in which we can put a lot of stuff later, and it's still under construction. And we can go through here and they won't find it. It will be harder for them to find us here, and something like that. If they gave 1-2 lines to explain this, it would have solved the problem. I could have accepted that because we saw stuff like that in Star Trek earlier, and so I could have accepted this if they had a quick explanation. But apparently the writers never thought about any of this, and so that's why none of this makes any sense, and we have to invent all these convoluted excuses to try to make sense of it. And you know, I'm always doing my best to try to make it make sense because I find it like an interesting challenge, like a thought experiment. And so I will try, I'm always trying to do my best to try to make sense of it, and I still cannot because it's so self-contradictory and so ridiculous that it's kind of funny. So anyway, I will do another video about all of this with even bigger details and with more demonstrations of the actual schematics, and so stay tuned for that. Let me know what you think and we can discuss it in the comment section below, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.